practitioner and has extensive experience in helping people through their spiritual awakening. Okay, Jassy, I hinted at this when we started, but I was really impressed by the variety and depth of your experience. A master's of science in psychology, executive at a tech company, and then spiritual leader. So, how did you kind of take that arc? Because you started off in tech, right? And as, I guess, a psychologist?
Yeah, I did. Absolutely. It didn't all happen overnight. And a lot of it, me going towards tech in the corporate world was me trying to people please and trying to fit myself in a box that was kind of created from a society point of view, like my parents, my grandparents, teachers, friends, family, colleagues, all expected. We all expect each other to go in a certain direction and to accomplish certain things. And really, even when we're looking at friendships, when we are getting to know people, we're looking to have ourselves reflected in each other. And I really tried to fit myself in a box. And I'm somebody that, I set my goals and I hit those goals and I became extremely successful in the tech world. I'm still in the tech world. And at some point in my career, something felt like I was that was missing. Basically, I would leave the house and I would just sob to work and there was nothing wrong. I would look around and be like, I have like the perfect job. I had the biggest office in the building. I was running teams. I had a wonderful husband, great family. Like there weren't any major disasters or tragedies that had happened in my life, but why am I still sobbing to work? And part of that was I'm not actually listening to who I really am on the inside. I didn't even really know who I was. And that even happened in college before the corporate job where I was jumping from like degree to degree. I wanted to be an art history major and then a journalist. Like I would go for the things that people would reflect at me and say, "Oh, you would be a really good lawyer." So I would try that. Right? But I wasn't listening to my internal dialogue, which was, I'm really interested in empowering others. I'm really interested in understanding how people tick, why people make certain decisions, and that was all psychology.
Yeah.
And so my whole like dialogue internally is like, I'm really interested in psychology, but that's not what people are expecting. So I'm going to go towards business. And, I climbed that corporate ladder. I got my I finally started listening to myself and I went for the psychology degree. I got my psychology degree and I quickly found out that I wasn't really meant to be in a room talking 101. I wanted to inspire people more in the corporate world. And I found out that there is this whole degree called industrial and organizational psychology where you're able to empower people in the corporate world and do it in a very professional way. And then
And
pretty soon I found out, oh, I'm also meant to go in a different direction where I ended up being in the spiritual world.
so, can I ask you, like, at what age did you finally, like, kind of break down and say, okay, I've got to do something differently here?
So I think I saw glimpses of it at different stages. So at the age of 23, some stuff was happening in my life that it was very clear that I wasn't on the right track. I had like 3 accidents in a span of 2 weeks. Like I just felt like whatever I did, it was just not working out for me. And so I had to reset myself. And it wasn't something that I was like, "Oh, I just need to reset and, like, get on the same path on the right path." No, it just kinda happened a little bit organically, and then later on, when I finally got my degree so at 23, I finally figured out, okay, psychology is the thing, and then around 29, 30, after I got my finished my degree, I was like, okay, that was one of the pivotal moments that I was like, "Okay, I got the degree, now what? Now I'm super depressed." Same thing when I got married. I got the marriage and the perfect guy for me. Now what? And I fell into a huge depression. So for me, my emotions and where how I felt versus how I was quote unquote supposed to feel, that's what really gave me the hint of like something else is missing. Something else is wrong. I finally got to, like, around 35, I had a huge meltdown, because I had it all, had a huge meltdown, was still sobbing to work, and was finally like, "Okay, I will try any at this point." So I went out of the conventional, and I started getting into Reiki, and I started really listening to my inner self and doing the mainstream stuff these days, like the shadow work, the inner child work, and things like that, and once I got into alignment of who I really was, I was able to identify these things quicker. There's still times where I'm just like, "Ooh, I went down this path and it's not the right path. Let me take a step back and kind of go inward."
Yeah, it's so interesting to me. The reason I asked the age is because I kind of relate to your story because I kind of did that too. You know, the degree I picked wasn't really what I wanted. It was because that was what was expected, et cetera, et cetera. And then I kind of hung out there until about 42 before I was like, I'm really done. Um, but 35, like that's when the 30 mid 30s, I was when things started to really. And it's funny because I feel like competent people are almost cursed in that regard because they will make anything work, right? So on the outside, everything looks great. It's working. But
We
when,
checked all the boxes. Look at
Mhm.
us.
yeah, yeah, I actually said that. I remember talking to a friend of mine once, and she was going through a kind of rough time too. And she said, "Listen, I checked all the boxes and ended up miserable. So I'm just gonna not check any boxes anymore."
Yep.
And I was like, "Yeah, I can relate to that." And I think a lot of women can relate to that. I think that's why I find older women so dangerous because it's like they've really just they've been through it, you know? Um, so tell me a little bit about your time in tech because I know that you mentioned you were the only Latina executive in a room full of 50 males,
Yep.
which is
50 white males. Yeah. Woo! It's been and that's still the case today, by the way. It's interesting. It's a very interesting dynamic because on one hand, I'm really grateful to be in that world and kinda see their dynamic. I'm able to step outside of myself and kinda see how they interact with each other and really understand their world without judgment, and kinda showing up, but let me tell you, 2020, 2021, I joined that company in 2017, and those were, like, some of the hardest times for everyone in the world, and for me, the way that it showed up, like, my whole, like, dark of the night soul, um, showed up in a very kind of passive aggressive way because in my past life, before I joined that company, I was at a very, very successful company where all of my leaders were women. So I was
Mhm.
nurtured by these women, these older women in their 50s going into their 60s. They had so much wisdom and I had so much admiration for them. And the way that they handled the company and they handled the people, it was how I wanted to show up as well. And then being thrown into, I wanted and I asked for it. I said, "Okay, I wanna experience something different." I got out of financial services, and I went into the gaming space, and I joined a team full of white, older males, anywhere from 45 to, like, in their 60s, and being in the boardroom with them every week, it serves for a very different dynamic, and in 2020, 2021 I was to the point we were all working from home, right, at that point, and I was to the point where I was so much in my masculine. I had to perform, I had to keep up. There
Mhm.
were certain unrealistic expectations and or I was being left out of conversations because,
The
just
boys
nat
club.
yeah, it's a boys club, and would be so much in my masculine that I would have a headache. I would have a
Mm.
headache because I wasn't showing up in my most authentic self. I had to outperform all the boys, and I would have to go outside and ground myself every single day. And at some point, I finally was like, I have to approach this in a different way.
Mhm.
I have to show up in a different way. And that actually, it's counterintuitive but because I already had built up the trust and the respect from my leaders, like, I didn't care about any of the other ones that were at my level, but the owners I did care about. I had already built the trust and the respect out of them. I was able to then show up in my divine feminine and be a little bit softer and less aggressive because there is this thing that happens when you're in this boys club that you tend to match their energy and you tend to want to be a part of it, but really it's like, what am I fighting for? At
I know.
the end of the
And
day.
and the truth is you can't win, right? That's not your natural you're not gonna win that game. You're not gonna outman a man, you know? I just
No,
yeah.
exactly, exactly, because what ended up happening is like, okay, I've proved myself and now people feel threatened. And so now it becomes this like, forget about passive aggressive, it becomes outright aggressive. And that's exactly what happened. I was like, okay, I can't. And it showed me a lot of things. It actually healed me from a lot of things. But I came from a place of like, what do I need to learn from this? How can I change myself in order to change the situation? And I stopped trying to like change people or these men's point of view or the way that they viewed me. I was like, you know what? I just need to change myself.
Yeah. That's all you have control over. But tell me a little bit about, like, some of the changes that you made, because I find that very interesting. Because I think a lot of women struggle with that, where it's like you're in a male-dominated space, and then how do you deal with that and stay true to who you are?
Yeah, so I started to observe my, behavior, from kind of like an outside perspective. I'd like to tell people I turned my observer on.
Mhm.
I started observing myself, and what I found out is, like, I was caring too much to be liked. I was caring too much to be understood because the words that were coming out of my mouth that I was observing myself, telling my friends, telling my husband is like, "I feel so misunderstood." I am so misunderstood. I feel like they don't get me. I feel like I'm not seen. And it's like, well, is it my job to make them see me? Is it my job to be understood? Or is it my job to show up and be the best that I can and show up to be the jazzy that they hired, right? Why does that matter? So I started really working on and I was judging them a lot.
Mhm.
That in my internal, like, dialogue, like, "Man, this person is really a mansplainer, like, he's telling me how to do my job all the time," and it's kinda like, "How do I stop that?" But really, I can't. I didn't understand this concept of, like, I cannot control how other people see me or how they behave towards me, and so I really started to, like, work on my self-judgment and my judgment in others, and then I started to just accept them for who they were.
Yeah.
And guess what? It stopped. It is so interesting how when I changed myself and like I'm just gonna show up and do my job and do it in the best capacity that I can in my integrity and in the best way that I know, I'm gonna stop trying to fit in. And here's the thing, I also learned how to set up really good boundaries. When somebody was trying to take over because that something weird was happening where I would be working on a project that was in my wheelhouse, and then all of a sudden, someone in business development or a peer would start doing my job. And
Mhm.
so there were these weird boundaries being crossed. And so when I started to firm up my own boundaries and voicing what I needed and voicing questions like, "Oh, what inspired you to do that?" Because that's already on my to-do list and that's kind of in my function as an VP of operations. Like, what's sparking you to do that? And then that would make them realize like, "Oh, that's you're right. Like that's not in my
Yeah.
job description, like, "Okay, go ahead and take that over," or whatever. Sometimes there would be longer discussions, but it was really those 3 things. It was the self-judgment, getting rid of the self-judgment and the judgment in others, firming up my boundaries, and just being in my own energy and showing up as myself and trying and stopped trying to make everybody understand me and, view me in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's so good. I think we spend a lot of time these days talking about the dynamics that happen, rather than just dealing with the dynamics that does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't know, like, when I talk to younger women today, there's a lot of like, "Well, he did this and he did that, and this is the typical thing we see, and da da da." And I was like, and I'm always like, "Yeah, I mean, at this point, you guys should just expect it." Like, it's just, yeah, that's what happened. Be yourself and just continue. Like, okay, so he mansplained something to you. Just continue. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, okay, yeah, that's great. Glad to
And
see it.
continue to also, state that boundary. Like,
Yeah,
I would say, "Thank you, so and so. I understand my job function." Instead,
yeah,
"Thank you for explaining that to me. I've been" I this is exactly what's on my to-do list. Like, I would still voice what I needed, and I would still voice, like, that I recognize that you're telling me how to do my job, like, and not in a mean way, but you can't just continue to come to me and mansplain things to me because you feel like you have some sort of power over me. Like,
yeah,
I'm still gonna assert myself in my full integrity and in the fullness of who I am without with kindness and compassion.
yeah. So, which of course then disarms them and makes them actually open to seeing the behavior, right?
Mhm.
Um, so you're in this kind of like high power, high executive position. What was the catalyst that kind of propelled you into the world of spirituality and energy healing?
Yes. I think a lot of us in this that have kind of crossed over to the spiritual world can I definitely identify with this. And we've checked all the boxes, right?
Mhm.
We're still sad, we're still feeling this depression, we're still feeling some sort of weight. And it might not be those emotions, it might be like we're feeling like something is missing. And I didn't know what, like, and I kept telling myself, like, this just can't be life. Like, I can't just be getting up every day, going in my 9 to 5, partying on the weekends, and then getting up and doing it all over again.
Yeah.
And I kept searching for that. And one day I was at my sister's house and I just had this complete and utter meltdown. And I was crying, I was throwing up. And at that point, I had been in therapy for probably about 15, 20 years. And I was like, you know what? I've tried everything. I've tried yoga, I've tried meditation. That's not working. I've tried therapy. That's not working. Like, at this point, I'll try anything. And about
Mhm.
2 weeks before that meltdown, I had a coworker who went to rehab. He went to one of those fancy rehabs in Malibu where he came back and he was sitting in my office and he was like, I experienced something really interesting that I think you might be interested in. And I'm looking at him like, okay. And he's explaining the whole Reiki process. And I'm thinking, like, that's really woo woo. Like, I don't know, right? I don't know about
Yeah.
that man. And like, I'm in this meltdown, in this, like, total, utter, complete physical and mental breakdown. I said, "You know what? I'm gonna try anything at this point." So I texted him and said, "I need the name and number of your Reiki lady." I looked her up. She was 3 minutes from my house, and I was like, "Okay, that must be a sign. Like, it can't be any easier than
Yeah.
that."
Yeah.
And I went to her, and with not any expectations, I was just like, "You know what? I'm just gonna try this and see what happens." I was there for about 2 hours. We talked. There's something so powerful about talking, but I've been talking forever with my therapist, and, when she did the energy healing, I could see lights behind my eyes. I could literally feel the anxiety, the pain in my back, the stress melting off of me. I had all of these beautiful visualizations, and afterwards, when we talked, she had similar visualizations. It was just a magical experience,
Yeah.
and it the first experience absolutely sold me on it, and I started going to her every other week, and that would, like, open up a lot more for me. I started researching books, I started talking to more people, and really, like, 5 years later, I became a Reiki master myself, because I wanted to know more and I wanted to be able to share this with friends and family. And then in 2020, when the pandemic happened, more and more people started asking me for it. And it's like, well, I didn't think of like creating a business out of this,
Mhm.
but I still love the tech world and I still love my corporate job. And so I was like, this is the answer. This is like the balance that I've been looking for because I love the stuff that I do in corporate America, but I also love sharing energy with people, teaching other people my knowledge and where I've been and how to move forward, like ideas on how to move forward. And so here we are today.
So you have a master's in psychology, right? So how do you bridge the gap between like traditional psychological practices and spiritual healing methods, right?
A great question. I love this question because I came to an intersection in my life where it's like, okay, am I going to get licensed? Am I going to commit to the stringent rules from the APA and solely like see people in a therapeutic sense? Because there's a lot of responsibility that
Hmm.
comes with that sense. But I was all learning all of these other things like curanderismo, shamanism, Reiki. Like I was really learning, and it's so funny because a lot of the basis of psychology comes from
Hmm.
these ancient practices. And I was like, I just don't want to go through this process of getting my license and then losing it because I'm doing somatic work, energy work that is not, necessarily approved by the APA. So I decided that I was going to go the energy healer route, but also use a lot of the basis and foundations of the ethics of the way that we use, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy mixed in with the pláticas and the energy work that I've learned in some of the ancient tribes that I've studied with.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about like shamanic practices? Like what would that entail? Like or in a couple of examples, just because I'm not sure everyone that is listening to this would know. Like most people are familiar with meditation, yoga, Reiki, but shamanic I think is a little less well known.
Absolutely, yeah. Shamanic is, well, first of all, the real shamans of the world are from originally from Siberia, but every tribe, even in Europe, Ireland, when I used to think of shamanism, I would think South America, right?
Hmm.
But it's all over the world, even Japan and Asian countries. And we all have ancestors that stem from these ancient practices. And all it is taking the wisdom from our ancestors, no matter where you're from, and bringing it into your modern day life. And so, for example, this could be meditation. Meditation is one of the practices that many ancient shamans and shamanic practitioners bring into their practice. Another form of shamanism is really being in tune with the herbs and the plants uh, of the earth, being in tune with nature. It's walking in beauty with nature, walking in right way with earth. In a lot of us have maybe cacao practices. That's taking a plant, a fruit from the Mother Earth and turning it into a ritual where you're allowing it to open up your heart, allowing it to cure you. There are so every tribe has some sort of elemental um, practice. So some of us work with the fire. I personally work really close with the fire and allow the fire to there are certain practices and rituals that we do in order to be able to be one with ourselves. Some of us work with the water, some of us with the winds. There's literally a tribe that's called the Four Winds by Alberto Viololdo, right? Um, and so, shamanic practices is basically bringing your ancient wisdom. Like a lot of us, like in families, like, oh yeah, my grandma used to do this one thing with this herb, and we still do it today. Like you're bringing in that wisdom from your ancestors, bringing in that wisdom from your lineage, and bringing it into your modern day life.
That's beautiful. So yeah, and I'm thinking about it now, and I'm like, yeah, my mom used to do certain things. You know what I mean? Um, but I think a lot of times people, when they think of shamanic practices, they think that it's mystical and out of reach. How do you like when you work with your clients? How do you make it accessible and relevant to the everyday individual?
Yeah, so I think in every practice, even in psychology, right, in therapy, you start with what we well, I like to call it la plática. The plática is basically just talking because there's something so therapeutic about telling your story, really having someone see you, having someone hear you. And then from that, I'm able to assess, like, oh, okay, like this person really needs some that what can really help for this person is inner child work. And so I'll take some of the ancient things that I've learned about how to do that ancient or that inner child work, or maybe it's from my psychology. I don't actually name it, right? Like, oh, we're now going to do some transformational core belief work. Fake,
Yep.
that's not gonna land. But I ask people like, "Are you willing to go in deeper? Are you ready to heal this?" I'll reflect back to them some of the things that they've talked to me about and ask like, "I have this really good method. It might not be for everyone, but I could see how this might help you. Are you willing to be open to trying it out?" And,
Yeah.
maybe the next time they come in with a different part of themselves that they're ready to work on. And then I try a different method or we work on it with it in a different method. So my whole I think purpose in the ways that I handle my whole practice is I take bits and pieces from my psychology, from my shamanism, from my Reiki, from other practitioners that I've learned from, and I have this huge toolbox to then understand the person at a certain level and be like, okay, well, this thing and this thing over here can potentially empower them to bring them back into alignment to who they really are. Because I don't believe that healers actually heal anybody. I believe that they empower people to bring them back into alignment so that then people can actually heal themselves.
Yeah, I think that's true. Because I think a lot of people spend a lot of time going from healer to healer to healer to healer only to hear the same thing, which is we can only give you tools. You're the one that has to do the work. And I think a lot of people sometimes resist doing that work. And until they're ready, they're never gonna heal.
Mm.
Um, one of the things you mentioned in your bio too is you've chosen to not have children. This is no judgment on my part. I always tell people, God, like, do what's right for you. But tell us a little bit about your decision.
Yeah, so I remember being 15 and just kind of I used to do a lot of daydreaming and what I wanted my life to look like, just like any normal human being. And one of the things that came up was like, well, I don't think I ever want to be married because that seems like a lot of responsibility. This is me as a 15-year-old, right? And I don't know, kids look really hard. Like
Yep.
there were a ton of kids in my family, and it's just like my parents, my aunts, uncles, like it just seemed really hard. And I wanted to be, and I grew up in the 90s. So there was like this insurgence of like independent women and
Mhm.
there was, like, all of these models that you can see, Oprah, Destiny's Child, like, that would that was really about women empowerment, and I really wanted to just live life as a individual. And later on, like, in my 30s, I learned that my grandmas actually not my grandma, but my great-grandma actually never got married. She wanted children, but never wanted to have a husband, and then her mom also wanted to have children and never wanted to have a husband.
No.
So I thought that was really interesting that that was coming down like, my lineage, but also I had this, like I was just a 15-year-old kind of imagining my life, but all through my life, I was like, "You know what? I don't I if I'm meant to have children, I want to be financially responsible. I don't want to ever be in this survival state. I want to be able to provide a good and safe space for them." And so I kept on every year I would revisit and I still revisit. I'm in my 40s now and I still revisit it like because I could still adopt, I could still
Yeah.
foster, you know what I mean? And I still revisit like, okay, am I meant to have a child? Am I meant to like guide someone and care for another human being in the way that a parent does? And the answer is still no for me because I have this practice and I have all this energy and availability to be able to guide and empower others right now. If I were to have this responsibility, I think that all of my energy and all of my focus would be towards that. Yes, I would get other stuff done, but I wouldn't show up in the same way. And I think that when I look at my life purpose and I look at where I'm aligned to, I'm really meant to be in community and be with people within my community, whether that's online or physically, in the physical space. And it's to really show up in that way. Now I changed my mind about marriage. I was dating my husband and we had never talked about marriage or anything like that. And he popped the question. And I really I took a while to answer. I was like, okay, let me review and align and I was like, "You know what? I don't see myself with anybody else, and this is something that he really desires, he really wants." And it's like, "Okay, does the marriage thing act is that of importance to me?"
Yeah.
And, the answer was no, and it's like, "Okay, well, I said yes, and
Mhm.
we went to the ceremony, and, we're really happy together, and I'm really happy we did it. So I kinda did the opposite thing that my grandmas did,
Yep.
where they had children, but I chose to have a husband without children.
Well, I always tell people this all the time. It really you're right. It's a big decision, and I'm so glad that you kind of didn't unconsciously just step into that because you know I don't know. I guess I'm just not a baby pusher. It's like you have them if you want them. You
Yeah,
know
I
what I
just love children. I have so many
right?
girlfriends that have children and that wanted to have children, and they would come to me for energy work, right? Because they wanted to manifest a child into their life, and it was a beautiful thing to see that, and I love when people want that, and it's a conscious decision. It's not something like, "Well, it's because my mom wants me to have a child." My parents ask me all the time, like, "When are you gonna have children?" It's like, "Well, we've discussed this, like, you'll have to, talk to my brother or my sister about this because 'cause I'm not sure."
You'll have to get your grandchildren from somewhere else. Um, well, Jesse, now I get to ask you a question that I ask all my guests, and it is, what is a weird habit or ritual you have that makes your life more joyful?
Yes. Yeah, so I have a couple of them but the one that comes to mind when you first asked this question earlier is, I really love having my cacao ceremonies. I wake up actually, one of the things that I do when I wake up is I no longer have a to-do list. I wake up and I ask myself, what are the 2 main goals? If there's nothing else that I'm gonna get accomplished today, what is it that I'm going to accomplish? And that might look like going to the gym and meditating, right? Or whatever is on my list or on my to-do list in my mind. But really after that is going into the kitchen and preparing my cacao because I sing to my cacao. I ask for it to open up my heart to cure what needs to be cured. And, I feel like it's this whole dance that we have together that really ties me to my ancestors and brings in all of my abuelas and really guides me through the day. And, I just sit in meditation as I sip my cacao and I give it thanks and I give thanks to the water, the fire, the spirit, the air, and the earth for bringing the cacao to me and, I find it to be a very special and joyful part of my day because cacao was something that my grandma would send to, get from Panama back in the '80s, and that's how she would heal me. She would
Mhm.
get the cacao butter and heal my wounds with that, and I grew up with it around me, and so to have that as part of my daily practice, it really brings me a lot of joy.
That's a beautiful, beautiful answer. Jesse, it was a pleasure having you. And if you're out there and you'd like to hear more from Jassy, follow her on her Instagram account, Crystalunavortex, or join her on her website, www.krista-luna.com, where Master Your Boundaries is now available. All links, as always, in the show notes below. And I'd love to hear from you about this episode. How do you reconcile the mystical with the practical? Hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Farah Haydar. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll get notified when a next episode is available. Also, I'm giving away a PDF of some of the best quotes we've had on the show, beautifully designed to print and journal your thoughts. Email me at farah@farahhaydar.com and title it Quotes. Talk to you soon. Till then, chase your happy.